through some of the data behind indocyanine green and its utility. Can I get my first slides, please? And to set the stage for that, I want to talk a little bit about the medical, oncologic, functional, and financial costs of anastomotic leaks. If we look at the incidence of leaks in contemporaneous literature, it's generally anywhere 10 to about 15%. And these are all pretty modern series, fairly large series from around different places in the world. And, sorry, can I get them back on, please? Lost the slides. And if we look here, this is the Grecar study, of course, without mechanical prep. We were talking about this earlier, 16% with 7%. So again, the blend comes in somewhere around 12%. Leaks have a cost, and we all think about the short-term morbidity, percutaneous drainage, return to the operating room, make a stoma, but it goes beyond that. There are long-term functional problems, long-term oncologic compromise, and a long-term cost as well as a short-term cost. So firstly, just to look at this short-term cost, this is a study using the premier prospective database in the US, propensity match study of over 6,000 patients, analyzing the impact of anastomotic leak on length of hospital stay and cost, and finding there's a lot more patients, obviously, with infectious complications, more patients admitted to the hospital. So cumulatively, it's an increase of about a week per patient in the hospital after an anastomotic leak. The other things go up, as you'd expect, post-op infections, not just the abscess itself, but other infections, subsequent percutaneous drainages, pneumonias, and the like, and readmissions go up. So a lot of adverse sequelae go along with the leak. This study is pretty recent, and I think it's one of the most striking. It's termed failure to rescue, and this is the ultimate failure to rescue because it refers to death, 30-day mortality. It's a large series using the American College of Surgeons NSQIP database, and I alluded to NSQIP in my last talk. The 30-day mortality in 30,000 patients studied during that time period increased sixfold. So 600% chance of dying within 30 days of surgery if you have an anastomotic leak. That's significant. And putting everything else aside, that is a very, very significant finding, besides all the rest, reoperation, readmission, and the like. Sixfold increase in death. And that's why there's so much interest looking at anastomotic leaks. What causes leaks? We discussed this earlier a little bit, but older age, sicker patients, cancer, open surgery. Laparoscopy is found to be protective in many, many studies. Bowel preparation was actually protective if a leak occurred. Didn't protect against leaks, but protected against adverse sequelae from a leak, presumably because there wasn't continued leakage of stool through a hole. These data are from Neil Hyman before we moved to Chicago. They're from Vermont, 200 patients, looking at leaks with and without contrast extravasation, and finding that these patients had a long-term price to pay. So it's not just the short-term morbidity and mortality, but long-term irregular bowel function, permanent stoma. Again, that's a pretty permanent reminder of an adverse outcome. These data are from Cleveland Clinic main campus, Gene Ashburn and Feza Remzi. It's a 30-year time period, so it's a long span of time with a lot of people being operated on by a lot of surgeons, Jagelman, Lavery, Weekly, Fazio, and many others, Oakley, looking at what happened with leaks. And you can see adverse functional outcomes for up to 3 years, where patients are having more bowel frequency, clustering, nocturnal bowel movements, difficulty holding stool, soreness, use of a pad, all of those things leading to reduced quality of life. This one looks in a little different manner, using 25 patients who had leaks and comparing them to 50 patients who did not have leaks. Several instruments, the SF-36, the GI quality of life, and the EORTC instrument. And looking at these things, it's a bit hard to read perhaps, but physical functioning, physical health, social functioning, general health, all of these things worse in patients after anastomotic leaks. all of them worse. Other things here, emotional functioning, physical functioning, global scores, all worse after an anastomotic leak, and so on. Other metrics using the ERT scale for pain, pelvic pain, abdominal pain, and problems relating to the stomas that these patients ended up getting. Stoma-related problems, sore skin, whether perianal skin without a stoma or skin around the stoma with a stoma. How about survival? I mean, this again is an ultimate endpoint. You have short-term survival, like increased mortality from a leak, and you have long-term survival, such as decreased long-term survival because of recurrence of cancer if your initial operation was performed for cancer and you had an anastomotic leak. Again, the overall leak rate was about 10%, same as seen everywhere else in the world. No difference in the Charlson score for patients managed with or without surgery, but there was a significant difference in leaks in terms of survival. So not only did these patients have a lower survival rate in the short term, but they had a lower survival rate in the long term, in particular, if the leaks were significant. So in other words, the patients who required reoperation were the ones who did poorly. Patients with like a small radiographic leak didn't matter as much. So clinically significant leaks, again, equal death long term. And increased local recurrence. So here's a meta-analysis covering a very long period of time, starting in 1965 with almost 22,000 patients gleaned from a variety of different studies. And if you look at these studies from really all over the world, you see that there's a long-term cancer-specific mortality odds ratio 1.75 and local recurrence of 2.05. So an anastomotic leak isn't just an inconvenience. It doesn't mean just that the radiologist has to drain it. It means the patient may die. They're going to cost more to take care of. They're going to have higher local recurrence rates, and they're going to have worse function. Here's another one, more recent, 224 studies. 11 were included in the quantitative analysis, looking for local recurrence and cancer-specific mortality. And again, same finding, lower survival or higher, conversely, higher cancer-specific mortality in patients who had anastomotic leaks. As you can see here, again, the diamond doesn't touch the center bar. So this is significant for higher cancer-specific mortality. The Oxford group looked at their data, anastomotic leak rate, right where everyone else is, between 10 and 15%, half of whom got reoperated. They compared it to the national reoperative group of 6%, 23,000, and they looked at their increased costs. And you can see the amount of money in sterling that they're paying per case to take care of these patients. So there's the cost associated with it as well. There's been a lot of work looking at anastomotic leaks because of these problems. Cost financial, cost oncologic, cost functional, cost in terms of life, local recurrence and death. And these are two studies that we put together. One was North American, or mostly North American, published in Journal of GI Surgery, and the other was a UK group in colorectal disease. The reason that we had the interest in these is because we finally have something we think that we can do to help reduce that anastomotic leak rate from the traditional recent 10 to 15%. And it's what Prof. Lacey showed today in his case, indocyanine green. And that's what we're going to talk about this evening, a little later this evening, that we may have an answer. So before we had a potential answer, there wasn't as much interest in people getting together and talking about leaks other than figuring out how to classify them, quantify them, diagnose them, and treat them. But how to prevent them, that's a different story. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I wanted to set the stage as to why leaks are really, really bad and why we'd like to avoid them, besides us having to stand up at morbidity and mortality in front of our colleagues and say, yeah, I had an anastomotic leak. So why do anastomoses leak? So towards that end, we've asked Prof. Barrow to talk about how anastomoses heal and why they sometimes don't heal. Thanks.